Hey everyone, this is Damon with Myo-Fit. We wanted to start off a little presentation thing that we're going to do on a weekly basis or monthly basis from here on out. And we're going to basically answer questions that we get commonly from our clients or other people that we see in the gyms that we're in. So today I'm going to be covering a question that we get all the time. Basically, we're going to be going over whether or not you should be static stretching before a workout, before a run, a swim. Any activity that you're doing, basically, should you be static stretching before? So first things first, what I want to talk about is what's the difference between a static stretch and what's the difference between a dynamic stretch. So easiest way to show this, a static stretch is something that we're going to be holding generally past 30 seconds, and it's going to be going to an end range of motion. So the best example is a hamstring static stretch. So what we'll do, come down, touch your toes, and hold for 30 seconds. So that's what a static stretch is. A dynamic stretch is going to be something where we're going through a movement. So the best example of that might be a high knees. So that would be me moving and going through a dynamic movement where I'm also taking the joint through a range of motion. So just so you guys can have an idea, when I say static, that means a hold. When I say dynamic, that means moving. Okay? So we're going to get into some of the fun science portion of the evening. So first thing we need to know and understand about muscles and how they work and whether or not we should be static stretching before is the difference between a muscle spindle and a Golgi tendon organ, or a GTO. So first things first, let's talk about muscle spindles. Think of these as slinkies in your muscles. Anytime that we contract a muscle, they're being put on a stretch, and they respond by making your muscle contract. So basically, think of your muscle spindles as the mechanism in your muscle belly, so the middle part of your muscle. Think about muscle spindles as what drives us to produce a force. So maybe a bicep curl, a hamstring curl, an extension. That's what helps our muscles move. The other component of muscles is what's called a GTO, or a Golgi tendon organ. So GTOs, they're in the ends of muscles and our tendons. So if we're using our bicep, you have a GTO right here near your elbow, and you'll have one right up here in your biceps tendon. And what they're responsible for doing is stopping a contraction or trying to basically limit a contraction. So just to give you an exact definition, what a GTO is, it's a proprioceptive sensory receptor organ that senses changes in muscle tension, and it lies at the origin and the insertion of muscles. Basically, all that's saying is, when I make a contraction, let's say I have a 100-pound dumbbell here, and I'm trying to do a bicep curl, if my muscle feels like it can't produce enough force to do that and it's going to get injured, what my GTOs do is they tell my muscle to shut off. So if any of you guys have ever been sprinting, or any of you guys have ever been lifting a heavy weight and you felt like a muscle spasm or a muscle catch, that's your GTO at work, basically trying to protect your muscle from tears or avulsions. An avulsion is when a tendon gets ripped away from a bone, basically. So those are kind of what the muscle spindles and GTOs do. So quick recap, muscle spindles contract muscles, GTOs help them relax. All right, so now to get to the main point of this lecture is whether or not we should be static stretching before we're doing dynamic movement. That might be CrossFit movements, running, any type of bike, any type of swimming, basically anything where you're going to be going through activity. Should we be doing static stretching before? So here's a couple of things that you need to know about GTOs when we do a static stretch. So remember, GTOs are what helps prevent injury in our muscles. So when we're doing a static stretch, again, that's going to be a stretch and hold. When we're doing that, what's happening is we're making our GTOs less sensitive, meaning we're making them not do their job as well. So they're supposed to protect our muscle from injury. So when we're going through a static stretch, basically what we're doing, if we're holding it for 30 seconds or a minute, we're causing those GTOs to kind of not do their job anymore. Well, the purpose of the GTOs, remember, is to prevent injury and stop us from using or producing too much force and causing tears or avulsions. So right now there's a bunch of research out on this. I'm sure most of you guys have, in gym back when you were kids, or even now maybe in some of your classes, are still doing some static stretching and holding before your activity, whether that be a marathon or CrossFit. And we kind of want to flip our mindset with that again a little bit. So the research that's been coming out in the last 10 years shows us a couple different things when we're trying to talk about static stretching before exercise. So the first thing that static stretching before exercise is going to do is it's going to cause decrease in power output. So if I'm trying to do, let's say, a power clean, a pretty basic movement, I'm coming from the ground, coming under there. If I'm doing a static stretch prior to that, I'm reducing the amount of power I can produce from the ground to that landed position. So that's one thing static stretches do before dynamic movement. The other thing that they're going to do is they're going to decrease our joint stability. So when we're going overhead, let's say we're snatching, so going from the ground overhead, shoulder stability is going to be a really, really important factor in being able to not only hold the weight where it's at, but also get the weight to the position we need. So when we're doing static stretching before workouts, we're also going to reduce the ability for our joints to stay stable. So you might notice an inability to lock things out, or you might just not even be able to get it up there in the first place. You might have to bail earlier. So that's another thing that GTOs cause, or what happens after we static stretch. And the third thing, and arguably the most important from our perspective, is it increases your chance for injury. So kind of revisiting the GTO a little bit, basically, if I'm trying to go max on, let's say, a power clean, and I'm going to go do a bunch of shoulder mobility before, and I'm going to do like the door stretch, I might do some lat band stretch. If I'm going to do that before a movement, and then I try and go, if I try and go do a power clean, a max, basically what I'm doing is I'm taking all of the GTOs in my muscles, whether it be my bicep, my tricep, my pec, and I'm making those less sensitive. So I'm basically increasing my risk to have a muscle strain, whether that be just like a pull, or even an avulsion fracture, which basically what that is when a tendon rips away from the bone. So those are some pretty serious injuries, and we don't want to mess around with those. So kind of the whole point of this lecture for you guys is to realize that static stretching is not necessarily getting us prepared to do dynamic movement. So what we want to try and do before exercise is going to be more dynamic movements to get warmed up. Dynamic warm-ups are going to increase power output, increase joint stability, and decrease our injury rate, which are completely the opposite of doing a static stretch before. So hopefully that was informative for you guys. If you have any questions for us, don't hesitate to message us on Facebook or grab one of our cards from one of the facilities that we're at. But kind of the biggest takeaway from this for you guys is try not to static stretch until after you're done working out, or significantly before. So maybe in the middle of the day at work, or in the evening, you're watching TV. That's the right time to static stretch. Basically, dynamic movements are the only thing you should really be doing before exercise. So, hope you guys enjoyed, and have a great evening.